While school places for next year have been allocated in most provinces, it's never too early for parents to start researching if they have to make their applications for the next round. Well, to help us with tips on choosing the right school for your child is Yandiswa Xhakaza, who's an education specialist. Yandiswa, thank you so much for joining us this evening. A very important conversation because we know that education, of course, is important and schools provide that, but also the school that your child goes to doesn't only provide the education that they need, but also a bit of character building. Take us through the importance of picking just the right school for your child.
Yeah, thank you, Masa, for having me. So I must just declare that tonight I speak in my capacity as a mother who has two children one going to grade 1 and another going to grade 8.
Wow.
So it's also quite personal because I've been searching and applying some of these insights that I basically came to actually through that process. And so really I speak as a human being who's going through the system. So my advice is quite personal in that sense. But what I did find was that a safe school environment is actually fundamentally important in our search. So the culture of the school, the values of the school, because it is the environment where you're going to leave your kids for most of their day. They're growing up in that space. And what kind of space is it? What kind of values are being imparted in that environment? How is bullying being handled? Is it a fair space? Can children be themselves in that space and thrive and be seen and be nurtured? That is so critically important. And I think oftentimes parents place academic performance, sport, and maybe proximity. There's these sort of single layered approaches that we use when we look for schools, but really what we want as a society, as individuals, and the desires we have for our children is that they might be in an environment that is safe at an emotional level for them. Often parents will say, oh no, kids fight in that school or there's been stabbings in that school, and that's enough to deter a parent. But we don't look at the other ways that are not as physical or as evident to the eye that might still be very detrimental to the emotional well-being of a child. And those subtle things in terms of how the school treats your child. Is the school predominantly white? And do you want your child to have a sense of identity crisis in that space? Those are really the things we should be looking out for. How diverse is the teaching staff in the school, right? The leadership of the school, those things matter. Is my child reflected back to him or her in the staff complement of the school? And so those are just really some of the sort of more subtle, if you will, stuff that we often really don't look at, right?
And also, as you're speaking as well, like as I'm just thinking about, when you're looking at the so-called, inverted commas, good schools as well, the checklist has always been, of course, academia, of course, the sports as well, and perhaps even, the arts and culture, if they have like a good drama department or anything like that. But when you're talking about how they treat your child, for instance, how does a parent then make sure that they do treat their child correctly without them having been at the school before? In your case, you have, a child going to grade 1 and another going to grade 8. This is new school environment, of course. So how do you do it then? Do you speak to other parents who have children at that school?
Yes, so when you are still searching, you do need to speak to the children in the school. That's what I do. Well, that's what I did. The children are a lot more honest about their experiences, right? Because you understand that some parents place their kids in specific schools for purposes of social upward mobility, networking opportunities, interaction with a particular class of people, right? So it's a very sort of social strategy, if you will. And so they don't actually spend the time with the kids themselves to discover what is happening for your child in that school, right? Sometimes parents can be so caught up in the other stuff of being in that school and not in the child in the school. And it is the child who's going to tell you that, oh, the discrimination is unspeakable. It's the child who's going to say, I didn't. Sometimes they don't have language for it because it's just, they don't have language. But in the conversation, you discover what they're experiencing is actually terrible, right? And it is those cues that you then take that give you a sense of the school. And so don't underestimate the child in the school, in the system. They will tell you what is happening. They're that honest, And sometimes they were hoping someone would ask.
Yeah, absolutely. We know how frank children can be as well. And to a parent who's going to schools, looking around, researching as well, speaking to different school bodies as well, what would you recommend, Yandiswa, are the right questions to ask to get the answers that you're looking for?
Oh, beautiful question. One of the answers, I think, around bullying, around character, I like to ask about the system that is used to manage behavior, right? Is there a restorative justice system in place? How do they handle bullying, right? How do they handle bickering? How do they handle this? How do they do that? Is there a just system, and a safe system, and a system that restores the dignity of the child? Or is it a very punitive system? So you need to hear out these things because they're telling us about the character of the school, right? But yeah, so that kind of question is helpful to say, how do you handle these things? But also, another question I love to ask is the teaching methods. What are
Yeah.
your teaching methods, right? Because children are so bored at school because teachers come and stand in front and just like regurgitate facts that they can chat GPT. And they're standing there just thinking, really? Are you going to stand there for 30 minutes telling us something we could check out on the internet? So again, children are very bored. You need to engage them differently. You need to be doing several things. Is there hands-on experiential learning? How is the learning happening? That's so important because it determines whether the kids are disengaged or not. Those are the sort of two that I can think of now.
And just finally, before I let you go, quite a bit, also in the intro, you spoke quite a bit about safety, and all kinds of safety, of course, the mental health of the child as well that will be attending that school, but also, of course, the physical safety. We are living in a crime-ridden country as well. Just a few weeks ago, we had this case of the alleged Pastor Mboro who walked, stormed into a school armed, and the children were all traumatized there too. How big of a factor has safety, particularly having security at a school, become for parents while they're looking for schools for their children?
You know what? Safety is not even something we should still be considering in our search for schools. It should just be there because these are children that we are looking out for, right? So it's a pity that it's still a thing, in fact, that parents must look into it, Are there cameras? Are there panic buttons? Is there a security company? And I understand that this sometimes, sadly, only applies to a particular social class. But when we look at all the quintiles in our system and all the schools across the different social classes, the bare minimum is that we should have, a fenced schools, like with an access gate. But it's unfortunate that these things are just not there. And I think this is where the role of SGBs comes in, because SGBs have so much to do. There's so much work. There's so much advocacy. There's so much pushing for things to take place as a voice of reason and agitation for their children in the different communities. There is that structure that should be doing. So of course, it's not just their responsibility. There's a government in place that should see to this. But in terms of just pushing and making sure that we try and fast track at a school level, I think SGBs can play a better role.
Yandiswa, thank you so much for those tips. You really have given us something to think about this evening as well and moving forward. Really appreciate your time. That is Yandiswa Xhakaza, who is an education specialist, just talking to us about the importance of picking the right school and how to pick the right school for your children.